This is Bigger Questions with your host, Robert Martin.
Welcome to Bigger Questions. Today's big question, is God just for kids? We're asking today's big question to Colin Buchanan. Colin is an ARIA, APRA and 9 times Golden Guitar winning singer-songwriter whose diverse career includes being an ABC TV Play School presenter, sought-after hit song collaborator and Australia's #1 Christian kids artist. He's written numerous musical albums and he's a popular performer around Australia, and he joins me now. Colin, welcome to Bigger Questions.
Hello, Rob. I was just listening to that thinking I'd like to meet that guy.
Well, Colin, you do have an impressive CV. You're a popular performer. Is there a particular way that you like to be introduced?
I'm always a bit self-conscious about, I realise people need something to hang their hat on. And so it's good to say, he's a guy from Play School. And people go, right, yeah, I remember that. It's usually the parents, not the children, unless they've started to mine YouTube for those old 90s Play Schools that are lurking there quite delightfully. Or you won an ARIA award or an APRA award, that's sort of a good thing to say. But when it sort of lingers on a bit too long, it's like, well, get on with it, it's the law of the jungle out there, and is this guy going to keep my attention or isn't he? And so I don't really. Brevity is probably the
okay, sure. Yeah. So this is Colin. He's a musician. How about that?
Yeah, that'll do.
Okay, sure. Well, Colin, you do have a diverse range of musical interests, 9 times Golden Guitar winner, and you've also written multiple children's albums. Do you ever get confused when you're doing a gig, maybe sing country songs for kids or kids' songs at a country gig?
That's an interesting thought. I've created a rod for my own back, really, and that I've got these multiplicitous, is that a word, elements to my career. Thankfully, it's only rarely that I've had the clear country music fans stand up in a children's show when I'm up the front dressed as a caveman singing, Jesus said, I am the way, hoo-cha, hoo-cha, hoo-cha-cha, and they're thinking, this isn't exactly Galaz and Gidgee. And they've sort of quietly slipped out. Probably not so quietly said, can I have my money back?
Right, yeah.
If it's a country show and I've, the kids have all come along, hopefully we do our job right and we warn people what they're getting into.
So, Colin, you have a multiplicity of musical interests and talents. So when did you discover that you were musical, that you could play the guitar, sing and even write songs?
I never thought of myself as musical growing up. I was attracted to music, and Dad had records, particularly my dad. But I just found myself singing around the back garden, but not performing. And I was in a Sunday school musical when I was about 9 or 10, and it was apart from the fact that it was terrifying. It was obviously I had just enough talent to. To be the lead at the Lagano Pecos Uniting Church Sunday School concert, but which you didn't mention that.
That's a prestigious role.
I didn't
mention that.
Yeah. But I was very, very self-conscious with music, any musical pursuits. But then I got to church, and it's sort of music is a big part of being a Christian. Being involved in church. And I played the ukulele a little bit because Dad brought one home, and we sort of picked out some chords, and then it was a bit inevitable. It's like, stop playing that thing here. Here's a guitar, play that. So, you learn 3 chords and you start playing some of the songs sort of sheepishly at the back of the youth group guitar band. And that sort of became there was a bit of a drive to create as well. I've always had a drive to create in one way or another. And I found myself just wanting to put words together. In fact, I was amazed when a friend of mine who's been a Presbyterian minister now for basically nearly all his working life, but when he sat me down and sang a song, and I said, wow, that's great. And he said, yeah, Margie and I wrote that yesterday. And it was like, oh, it sounds like a real song. It's wow, you just wrote that. So, I was encouraged to create in our church, and at the same time, I just loved hearing, especially folk music. And I love the music of, say, the Eagles and Jackson Browne and that sort of West Coast American sound. And I just love the joy of music. I was listening to 2SM in Sydney as a kid. So that was rock radio, pop radio. And, I just love what songs can do and how they make me feel, and to be standing sort of standing inside a song, or performing a song and seeing the power that song has to delight or move people or make people feel something that they hadn't sort of really. It creates a door into experience for people that is really quite unique and powerful.
No, so Colin, a lot of your music is Christian, singing about God,
Yeah.
Jesus, and the Bible.
Yeah.
So why is that?
I guess I learned from I created as a desire to have content in my songs, and I felt that was really important. Whereas a song that actually has what I think is biblical content, theology, the knowledge of God, and behind, if this was a dialogue with someone who didn't share my Christian convictions, they'd probably want to ask, wait, where's this coming from? And I suppose that, that the Bible's at the core of it. If you understand that God is a speaking God and that he's spoken in his word, the scriptures, it's not the only way he's spoken, but it's his revelation, if you like, to us in an incredible depth and detail. To be able to inject that revelation into song is a really powerful and beautiful and potent thing. And,
So then what convinced you then that the Christian message was true? Why do you follow the Saviour, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I'm one of these people who was quite convinced as a child. And I found myself in a church that was, I suppose, more evangelical, and a faithful Sunday school teacher when I was just hitting year 7, so about 11 or 12, who was an engineering student and was involved in, I think, the Navigators, who were a movement of Bible teaching, sort of very Bible-centered ministry at New South Wales Uni. We went through one of their Bible studies, and that unfolded what I would call, what we'd understand as the gospel, like the problem of people's existence and of sin, and God's solution to that in Christ. And it had never actually been sort of put quite so clearly. It had been put in sort of more romantic terms, ask Jesus into your heart. And I'd responded to that as a 7-year-old. And I think quite genuinely that, I understood God existed. I understood that I could have a relationship with him, and I wanted that relationship. But then when I understood the mechanics of that I'd been estranged from God. So perhaps I just sort of retrofitted a bit more understanding to that. But I needed no convincing that I was a sinner. And I think in our honest moments, none of us do. And by implication, that makes me estranged from God. And then to discover that the message of the Bible is that God has stepped into history in the person of Jesus Christ to reconcile sinners to himself. And the picture of Jesus' life is just a succession of arresting and confronting and surprising encounters of broken people and unclean people and outcasts and sinners and proud people as well, with the truth of God in the flesh, in Jesus. And then the great problem of death, which is a universal one that doesn't matter who you are, and doesn't matter how smug you look at anyone who believes anything. You're floating on the ocean of mortality along with the rest of us. And Jesus, walked straight into the path of the oncoming path of death, and did it in such a profound way as God's man, as God's representative, as our representative. So that all of that is very compelling to me, and
that was good news for you.
It was like chocolate. That's what I like to say. It's I know I believed as a child, but I'm not a child anymore. And there's been a lot of living in the meantime. I've had a great life, and I've raised a family and had a lot of life experiences. And so I don't sort of go back to a little sort of fluffy faith that I keep in a little glory box under my bed and have and go, and then return to the real grown-up life. But it's just I carry that faith with me. And in fact, Jesus commends a childlike faith, not a stupid, dumb, imaginary faith.
Yeah. Although you said that you were convinced as a child, like it was obviously your childhood was influential for you. But English comedian Jimmy Carr once said, "We've all got imaginary friends. I've just grown out of mine." And he was referring to God there. So isn't God something you just grow out of?
Well, this is the no disrespect to Jimmy Carr, but it sort of stuns me. I mean, it's I guess I'd answer that question by what do I find to write songs about? I've written a lot of songs for kids, or under the the disguise of kids songs. I just find that the Bible is so full of depth. There's so much depth. Yeah, you grow out of imaginary friends, sure. It's a little like saying, you know what, cancer, I just think it's overrated. Everyone talks about it. I'm just not going to get it. I just think it, and you'd say, well, that'll be fine unless you do.
Mm,
And I just think, well, I understand God to be infinite, and I understand imaginary friends to be make believe. And
mm,
God is real and infinite. And I love that the Bible, I was sort of thinking about this because I'd heard that quote of Jimmy Carr's before. And I love how the Bible is so full. No one can get the jump on the Bible. It's just like you read a psalm, like in churches, in thousands of churches across the world, people have read a psalm that says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." It's not like the Bible's going, "What? Someone said there's no God. What do we do now?" It's full of it's so realistic.
mm. So you just mentioned that your kids' songs are often a disguise. So are you writing for adults as well when you're writing your kids' songs?
Oops, did I say that? That was a secret. Um, well, you know, back in the day when we used to, if you got up there in the last hymn, or there was a hymn from the 600s, I think, and I don't mean AD 600, I mean round about the 600s. That was the section in the old Scottish hymn book, Presbyterian hymn book for hymns for children. And very often they could be the spine tinglers. You know, they'd be the ones that give you the goosebumps because they just had this really potent simplicity to them. So I've found too that, you know, you notice that it's the kids' talk where everyone's listening in a church. You
Mm,
know, the parents aren't, maybe some parents are on their phones, but back in the day, you could feel everyone focused, you know, on the kids' talk.
mm,
On the one hand, there's something very universal about pitching something simply and sort of quite vitally to children that attracts the interest of even big people. But there's also the other side of the coin is that children grow up. This is a discovery that I've made. I
yeah.
made it personally, and I've also observed it in others. And it's a cruel thing indeed. If you were a conduit to an imaginary friend, that when people do grow up and they discover, okay, I get it. It was just Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You know, it
Mm,
was nice for a time, or maybe it was the hare and the tortoise. You know, a fable.
mm,
You learn something from it, but it wasn't a real hare, and it's never been a race. Whereas I've always been very conscious that if I'm going to try and put the Bible into a kid's song, then it needs to bear the weight of time and age and experience. And
mm,
I can't entirely. That doesn't mean I try and say everything in a kid's song, and that is something that I do. I've observed some kids' songs, and I think, oh, you don't have to say everything. Just,
right. Yeah.
just say one thing, and then
Yeah.
say something else in another one.
Yeah. So Colin, do you think that you've written any spine tinglers?
Um,
Or is there any that you think, oh, actually, that's not a bad song. I'm happy with that one.
I, but I like to quote Paul Kelly at this point, the Australian singer-songwriter, who, when receiving his APRA Lifetime Achievement Award, and what a worthy recipient, and he said something along the lines of, "If I knew how to write a good song, they'd all be good." That's why not every hymn in the hymn book's a good hymn, because
Mm,
music's. That's why not every AC/DC song is a banger. Some of them just
mm,
sound like the other one before it and the one after it, and just occasionally, and they don't know what makes a great song.
mm,
And in the pop, when you're writing songs with other people, you don't know whether that song's going to. You just don't know. You can take all the time and think everything's in the right place, and then it just doesn't happen. So you got to be willing to sort of say, okay, I was there when that song was written. But in terms of just some of that mystery, that transcendence, and I think that's true, across music. I've got a song called Be Strong and Courageous, and that song has gone into places that I could never have anticipated. And I don't even remember writing that song. I think I wrote it in Kangaroo Valley when I was away on writing for the album that it was on. And I don't recall exactly how or when or what. But that song's been sung in it's a song that seems to gather lots of ages. It's got a sort of lullaby quality to it, which means that kids can sing it. But that lullaby quality is also sort of seems to have a content to it that is very resonant across the spectrum of ages. But so that's one that's, but I can try. I go, oh, okay. Well, that people like that song. I'll write another one of those. It's good
Be
luck.
even stronger. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. You've got to sort of, music's constantly humbling you.
They call it the X factor, I think, don't they? That's one of the things, and you just can't bottle that. It's just something that you just have, and some people resonate with it, and some people don't.
Yeah.
So then maybe thinking a bit about kids and and God and teaching them about God. Now, some people like Richard Dawkins, for example, says that children need to be protected from religion, and that teaching children about God is indoctrination and tantamount to child abuse. Now, potentially, as you produced children's albums, you're maybe a professional indoctrinator, perhaps. How do you respond to that?
Well, what's behind Dawkins' criticism? I mean, really, it's just that it's not true. Like if you said, I think it's indoctrination to say, look right, look left, and to insist that children hold your hand before they cross the road, they should be allowed to discover that for themselves. And you'd say, well, there's peril if you don't, if children. And I think if you understand the Bible to be true, then you think, well, there's not just peril, but there's also wonderful opportunities to live life under God his way. And that's your understanding if you're someone who has faith, and clearly Dawkins doesn't. So why does he get to make up the rules of soccer if he doesn't even play the game? So there's a compulsion to pass on what you believe. And Jesus commends faith. That's the other thing, that those little sort of tectonic plates of faith that were happening in my life as a 7 and 8 year old were very significant, and that's a sacred thing, and for me, I don't take that lightly, that as kids are putting the world together and putting faith together, I wouldn't want them to believe it because I tell them it's true. And in fact, again, that's that theme of transcendence is probably a relevant thing to say, that Christians believe in transcendence because there's a transcendent and present God, part of how we understand God's nature to exist. And so God is at work in kids' lives, and you've got to be very sort of cautious and careful with that. And that faith, that a childlike faith, is commended by Christ. And I think that's a really wonderful, potent thing. And soon enough, children do grow up. And here we are, and I do draw comfort. It's not sort of the only thing I draw comfort in my faith, but I think there's a lot of smarter people than me out there who have, mined the Bible and lived life and not found it wanting, and I, and that's part of why I read. I'm not a brain, but I try and read quite broadly, not just Christian material, but read across what's on offer out there, and to sort of examine life and think about life. And I haven't sort of stubbed my toe on something where I think, oh my goodness, what have I done? Quite the opposite.
No, because if you stub your toe, then I suppose you have to remember the Lord, then, don't you?
Reference to another song of mine. We're very good. Which interestingly, here's one. A boy who actually sang on the original recording of that went on to military college and was polishing, as one of their disciplinary measures, he was polishing a tap, which is like, okay, for 12 hours, polish the tap and I want to see my reflection in it, and it was just like a pretty brutal sort of experience. And he said he just sang Remember the Lord over and over again, and that's what got him through. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Just again, like kids grow up and It's like, how horrible if he just went back to that song and just found that it sort of dissolved,
Mm.
you know? So
But it touched into a deep reality. So this kid's song has actually touched to a deep reality, which has actually impacted him as an adult going forward in
yeah,
some of in
yeah.
challenging
So,
situations.
so I mean, in answer to the other question, are you writing these songs for adults? In a way, if they're not for adults, and they're just songs that kids can grow out of, then to me that speaks to the sort of I don't know, that perhaps something about the content of them is found wanting.
Mm.
Whereas if you
Mm.
for all that I believe the Bible to be, it's not something that's going to stop when you're age 12 or 10, or it's something that should carry you and will carry you
Mm.
through to all the way.
So now, Colin, a good number of your songs are memory verses, where you make a tune to accompany a verse of the Bible. So maybe this is not because you're necessarily bad with lyrics, and you're not necessarily you just can't come up with lyrics. I suppose that's not the only reason. You want people to understand the Bible, don't you? That's the
Well, it's more my memory. I'm a shocker with lyrics. I can't remember that. I've got this song that I'm for a New Country album, and I'm trying to. I'm thinking it could be a good single, but I'm just keep putting myself on stage, probably with a reasonable size audience, thinking I'm just not going to remember the words of that song, and so I'm terrified. So I actually taught at a Christian school for a little while, and part of the curriculum was memory verses, and I taught Sunday school back in the day, and we do memory verses, and the kids would get a sticker or something if they can remember a memory verse. And I thought, oh, well, I'm not going to remember these if I don't do something and fast. So I put them to music, and yeah. And look, one of the earliest ones was Isaiah 53:6, and that was a little bit controversial amongst my friend who I mentioned, who'd written the song, the Prezi guy. Said, it's sort of, it goes, we all like sheep have gone astray. Ba, ba, do, ba, ba. Each of us has turned to his own way. Ba, ba, do, ba, ba. But the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Sing, ba, ba, do, ba, ba. Isaiah 53:6. Ooh. And the kids remembered it. And my mate said, yeah, but it's a pretty serious verse if you just sort of start to pick away.
But the barbars aren't in the original version either, is that right?
That's right. I put the barbars in later.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry, just to confirm those who aren't familiar with Isaiah 53:6, the Baba Do Baba was a clever little device I added later.
Poetic device, perhaps, yeah.
But I had thought at the time, and it sounds a bit grim, but I was fast-forwarding, thinking, perhaps life is at its end, perhaps dramatically so, or maybe there's just a moment where these kids who've learnt this verse have a moment to consider, well, perhaps they haven't really thought about where they stand with God and who he is and what he's done. And that verse is a pretty unique verse in the Bible, and that it sort of encapsulates the whole thought of our own sin and frailty and fraughtness, God's greatness and goodness, and then the provision of Jesus as the one, the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world, as he's called, and that actually takes that sin, that whole transference, and so I thought, wow, it's a pretty potent verse if you can lodge it in there with a couple of bar do bars.
But is the word iniquity, because it does talk about iniquity, and this is the sort of the sin, the brokenness, the corruption that has been laid on Jesus. Is that word too much for kids to understand, do you think?
Well, this is an interesting thing, because I think there's too much for kids to understand in a lot of my songs, and I'm sort of quite comfortable with that, because I think there's a lot for me to understand in those, not just in the songs, but in the truths behind the songs. So I think, those of us who are canny with our money, would say, look, when you're buying your kids stuff, they're growing all the time. Just buy it a little bit big, see if you can get a little bit longer out of it. And so I don't mind the sleeves of some of my songs being a little long, hanging over the hands a little bit, or maybe needing to be rolled up, because there is a sense in which I mean, that verse in itself, and people have said, oh, you've destroyed that verse because, people can't read it without going, ba, ba, do, ba, ba. And lots of people say that because it's a verse that people come back to again and again and again. And they do that. They've been doing that for hundreds and thousands of years. And they do that because it is a profound verse. And there's a sense in which Bible truth is always well over our hands. The sleeves are always too long in a sense. And then that's the gift of preachers when they take something that maybe is familiar, or writers, where they take something that's a bit familiar and they just reveal its depth in a fresh way that is vital. That is something, if you like to stretch the analogy, it is something you can wear. It's not something to just ponder as an abstract. But iniquity is, that's a very potent thought, isn't it? That's a one-word description of us all, according to that verse.
So, Colin, is God just for kids?
God is not just for kids, but God is for kids. Because I love that we don't infer that, but that God articulates that. Jesus said, let the children come. So children have this wonderful capacity to know God, that the infinite God cherishes their worship and values their relationship, and he knows they're going to grow up. And he's going to be incredible to them as children, and he's going to be incredible to them as adults too, as life starts to take its chips and its bumps and its knocks and its scrapes, as it does for all of us. And he won't be found wanting when that child 92 years later or 22 years later or 58 years later has to lay down and in the sleep of death to know that they'll be carried through that on to an eternity with this God who will just keep unfolding. There's always another hill of wonder. What's the Narnia thing? They're jumping up waterfalls and saying onwards, deeper. And there's that sort of delight. And I think maybe there'll be echoes of childlikeness, not naivety, but actual childlike joy and experience in the eternity that we have with God.
Well, let me leave you with some of the Bible's answer to the big question, is God just for kids? From Isaiah 53:6. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. I look forward to you joining us next time for bigger questions. Thanks very much to our guest today, Colin Buchanan.
Tally ho, Rob.